can't tell if these things I'm thinking are like ideas that I'm putting together, or if I'm just like remembering stuff that I learned while studying East Asian language and culture in college. You never know. You never know.
You're on the air.
Oh.
Just so you know, don't say anything too I'm scared to open these screenshots.
The last one is good. It pretty much mirrors my crazy, what's the word, theory.
The last one. Is this what you do when you're...
Well, you kept on saying like, that's based on nothing. So I was like, probably. So I checked and made sure it was and wasn't. I just looked things up. And then found the history, and it seems like it's like, you know, kind of related. I don't know.
Oh, this is a screenshot. So I'm trying to get to the
Page?
to the actual the citation.
Yeah, it's
and
a screenshot. You can't.
I can't, you know. Come on.
You can find the Wikipedia page just like I did.
Yeah.
You can denigrate my sources.
I mean, you gotta check your sources.
I'm not gonna check it. That's Wikipedia's job.
Nobody takes Wikipedia. I mean,
I'm
I
not-
think Wikipedia.
I'm not
It's
citing
like,
sources.
remember when you? I mean, you don't, I don't know. You remember
For
encyclopedias? Do you remember
Yeah,
encyclopedia?
we had a set.
Did you have a Encyclopedia Britannica?
Something like that.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I was one of those.
Yeah, cool.
I never got it because we were poor. But you couldn't cite the encyclopedia
Yeah.
when I was in school.
Yeah.
Like you'd get an F.
Yeah.
You know, you had to
You
go
have
to
to
the.
do
You would
research.
start that, and then you would
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, and then when I wrote papers in high school, you read Wikipedia, and then you go to their cited
So we didn't
sources.
have Wikipedia in high school.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But
Do
it's.
you have trouble going to the library? Because it's the same thing.
It is not the same thing.
Yeah. You go to a book over that has like
you
a
don't know.
general
Do you remember card
idea.
catalog? You remember the card catalog?
Yeah.
You had to like pull the
Did you
thing
not have
out.
computers by the time you had
No,
to go
not
to
in
the
high school.
library
Not in high school.
College?
Kind of in college.
All right, sure. Your struggles were real, yes. But like, you know, you
Like
find...
research actually meant like something physical that you had to go and do and find.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
but
was-
like, this process was the same though. You don't like...
It's not the
You
same.
still start with a base book that has a general overview of the ideas that you want, and then you look at the sources that they cited. And then if it's a good book and it sounds right, and then those sources look good, then you cite those sources, right? And that's just the thing. And if it's really that deep, if someone's really going to check, then yeah, you can check those sources too. But
Gotta check your sources.
I'm not
sources,
going
sources,
to check Wikipedia sources when we're having a casual conversation about the history of stuff. It's completely, like, it would be, you could never say anything, right?
Exactly. And the world would be a better place if we didn't, right?
Yeah,
it would
but,
just
like,
be better.
I wouldn't like it if I couldn't talk to you ever. Like,
There's
how do we have a
it's
conversation?
interesting that there's this democratization of information and media, and anyone can go and like just look up something on Wikipedia and enter things on there.
Yeah.
And then everyone thinks that they like actually that makes them an expert in something.
I never said I was an expert.
No, I'm not saying you. I'm saying everybody.
Who's everybody?
Anybody.
Who's
There's
telling
a
you?
temptation. There's a temptation to
Just
go and
because
like
you're tempted.
read a few.
You're tempted.
I'm tempted.
You're tempted. Dang it.
I am very tempted. I like that better than tempted. I think tempted.
Tempted,
That's something my kids would say. My daughter used to call escalators uppalators. Or no, that was uppalators.
That's cute.
Which I always was very tickled by.
Temptation.
I was like uppalator and downalator. She called those elevators.
What do you call moving sidewalks?
Sidewalk-alators.
No, but it's like, you know, like we're talking about with the news. I don't have time to check all the things. And
Actually,
it's
it's
fine.
funny because you probably do have the time.
No,
You just don't want to spend the
I've
time.
got, yeah, I don't want to spend the time. It's not worth the time. If we're just having a casual conversation, right? We're not in here writing papers. I'm just trying to appear normal, you know? just let me talk about stuff without having to always be right. and then more things will be
Well,
said.
the funny thing is that even when you were relatively well informed, you don't ever get the right answer. I don't know that there ever is really, I mean, there's an informed answer, usually. There's a more or less informed answer, but then, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer, you know, because we don't really know.
Well, when we're talking about like the causes of wars, right? Like,
That's a very big question too,
Yeah,
because there could be
it's
many causes of wars, right? It's not like there's one thing that happened usually.
So
It's
when
usually
I
a whole
say-
bunch of things.
So when I say something outlandish, like opium production was actually the true cause of.
It could have been one, I don't know, but it could be one of the causes.
Maybe.
It could have been a contributing factor somewhere along the line. Probably was.
I don't know, but I'm not about to like source all the reasons why I think this when I tell you.
Why not?
You know? Because I don't remember all the things that I read in the history of my life.
Well,
that
I mean,
led
it's
to this
always
conclusion.
it's always interesting to me. Like when I think at some point you mentioned this before, and I kind of looked it up, and there is a book, like the kind of the history of U.S. or foreign, Western, involvement in, Far East drug trade.
But do I have to read the book before we can have a conversation about the topic?
It would be helpful because I want to ask you questions, and if you don't know, have any, you have a theory, which is fine. You have an idea, cool.
Yeah.
But if you don't actually have any facts,
Yeah.
then it's hard to have a conversation. So it's
Well,
almost
what I'm looking for is not to tell you this thing and say it's right. What I'm looking for is for you to poke holes in it, tell me it's wrong, and why it's wrong.
Yeah, but
the
poking the holes part is actually asking you questions.
Yeah, that's what you're for.
But then
You're the one who
you
knows
can't
things.
respond
You
because
read
you
books.
don't know you don't know the actual facts. You haven't read the book,
Oh.
so you got to read the book.
No, but now
Because then you can kind of be
now
just
I
like
have-
an authority.
Now I have a reason to read the book.
What do they call? Is it a little knowledge is a dangerous thing? No. Knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
Did you watch G.I. Joe as a kid?
But you gotta like start somewhere, right? And if I don't have any questions, why would I read the book?
Well, but you do have questions.
No, I have an idea.
Yeah, but the whole idea is to put the idea out, and then someone will have a question, and you can be like, "Oh, I actually have anticipated that question."
No, why would I anticipate your questions?
I don't know, because you want to be.
If I
you want to be an
anticipated
informed person.
No, if I anticipated your questions, why would I ask you the question?
Well, why would you ask me the question? You know I haven't done any of the work.
You know a lot more than I do about
Yeah,
stuff.
maybe, but that just means I'm better at making stuff up than you are.
Oh, then
Doesn't
should
mean I actually know anything.
Should I not ask you about if hey? This is,
Probably not. Not if you actually want to learn anything.
No,
other
it's
than
like-
how to bullshit.
No, it's like I have an idea, right? And it sounds crazy in my head because it's verified by nothing. It's based on, not hard evidence. But it sounds like a good story, right? It's a good little narrative, and it's a good way to view the world through like a specific scope. But it still could be completely wrong,
It could.
right? And,
It probably
but
is.
I like you because you've read books,
I've
right?
read some things.
You know things. You've been.
I actually had a book. I have a book today.
Yeah.
I brought a real book in.
Well, you brought the book after we had the conversation that I had.
Why
no
am I doing
information
all the
about.
work here? It's your
I don't
theory.
know. I didn't tell you to buy the book. I'm just.
Our heads are chopped off. Everyone's been watching us argue. Maybe that's better.
I didn't tell you to buy the book. I just had these
No,
ideas.
I told you that I have a problem where I like to do research, and if someone asks me a question, then I feel this weird compulsion to actually go and find out what the best, or maybe some of the best answers are.
Well, like how many books do you have to read before you're comfortable having a conversation with someone who knows nothing about the topic?
That's not my standard.
What's your standard?
My standard is to become as knowledgeable as I possibly can within the time constraints that I have as a human being.
Yeah, and I had 5 minutes, so my constraints were a little bit blurrier than yours, right? Like I just checked to see if the Wikipedia has sources. I feel really confident in the sources that they cite, And then I just keep, I just
confidence in
go on to have the next idea that may or may not be wrong. But if I have a good idea, I like to bounce it off
That's
you.
not how it works.
Every
for me.
once in a while, you're like, that's crazy.
I'm like a dog with a bone, I need to really just gnaw on that bone for like a long time.
I feel like the points.
We
that I
started
brought
talking
up-
about John, was it not John Donne? He's a poet. John Locke.
Uh-huh.
And I went out and I got the biography.
Yeah.
I had to special order that.
Yeah.
You don't understand, like, when you ask me questions, like, when people ask me questions,
Yeah.
there's a thing in my head, and then the more I read, the more I get to want to know.
Yeah.
Because it's the same thing when I read a book. I'm like, is that true? Is that right? What are they citing here? How do they know this? Where's that from? And then I go and I have to go look at that stuff too.
Yeah.
It's a rabbit hole. You send me down these rabbit holes. That's why I get annoyed, because I have to do all the work.
I'm not.
Why are you doing this to me, Kevin? I thought we were friends.
You do all the work. Like,
you're like winding me up. You know when you wind up a toy, you know it's, unless it breaks, it's gonna go.
What left about lock is there to learn that you're curious about?
Everything. It's fascinating to me. You know what's fascinating? You know, this is the thing that happens, is that someone asks me a question, right? And I'm like, either I think that's an interesting point, or it's wrong, or maybe I think it's wrong, but maybe I don't know. I'm curious. I'm not set in my everything I know is right, which is false, right? Like every time I'm surprised about all that stuff I don't know.
Yeah.
So then what happens is I go and I read a little bit about Locke, right? And then I'm like, holy crap, I didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I start reading more and more.
But like, do you go in with an original thing that you want satisfied? And then
it's only my curiosity. It's like, at what point does my curiosity become sated?
But doesn't
where I feel like enough people are saying essentially kind of the same thing that I'm like, this is the current state of knowledge in this topic.
Yeah. So you're looking for what that thing is, and that there's
kind of a consensus understanding amongst the people who are actually count their opinions.
But like, how many people does it take before you're satisfied?
It depends on the field.
Yeah, but like with Locke, like it's not exactly like it's not jiu-jitsu, it's not your job. So like, how deep into a casual interest like this are you typically willing to go?
Well, I'm interested in political philosophy anyway, so there's kind of like it dovetails. I mean, a lot of these things, I'm interested with history. I'm fascinated by.
But how much political philosophy? How much like it's diminishing returns, right? The more you learn about a topic, you'll get a clearer image, but like more clear each time. Like with the further time you spend in it, you'll get a better understanding of it, but every hour will be less valuable towards that goal. Right, like jiu-jitsu, right? The white belt phase.
It kind of spins you off, right? There's kind of different directions you can go. Where you can go like, you can start off with a big subject, right? Like if we start talking about natural law, natural rights. Yeah. That is a huge subject, right? And you can go and you can look at that from kind of the beginning, right? Like the first theory of natural rights, right? You go back to the Greeks, okay? And you can start reading Plato, and you can start reading Aristotle, okay? Or you say, okay, let's go to natural rights. What were the founders thinking about natural rights? Because they wrote the Constitution. This is the genesis of like the discussion. Yeah. Okay, here are the natural rights in the Constitution. This is how we all talk about them. We talk about the founders all the time. Well, what did they actually think? What did they actually write? What did they actually think? Like understand about these things? What were they building on? Yeah. They didn't make them up.
Oh, I am doing that.
Right?
I'm totally doing that.
So then you go and I read a book where they're talking about I think I mentioned this: Madison, Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton. Maybe not Hamilton. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. Adams. Did I say Adams already? Adams.
Sounds right.
So you start reading them, and then you start thinking, okay, well, actually, they didn't care about the Greeks, really. Yeah. They didn't know about the Greeks, but they cared about the Romans, and they cared about Cicero. So then I'm like, oh, crap. Let me go back to Cicero. What was he doing? Yeah. And you start reading about Cicero, and you start reading about Roman history. And then it's like 3,000 years of material you got to start thinking about.
See, I went a different route. We were talking about like natural rights and stuff, and then we came to the conclusion, but we were talking about like the whole self-evident thing kind of made it like hypocritical when like people were enslaved and stuff.
Yes.
So then I went towards like what ideas about slavery were historically present in some of these leaders.
Sure.
And like the religious justifications of slavery and the philosophical justifications of slavery, like traced back to the Greeks or Romans, and like how these ideas have been incorporated into the basically American political infrastructure.
Sure.
And it's different. It's further out. It's nowhere close to what I read in school, like high school.
Nowhere close.
And I didn't really study theology or like
human rights, natural rights, good. Democracy, good.
It's interesting.
That's the version I got.
Nobody
ever talked about John Locke either. I mean, John Locke was the person I learned about in college, and even then it was very superficial.
We got some Locke in high school.
Did you?
But
you got a better education than I did, I think.
We just like learned his name. I think we read a couple things, but
Read some excerpts from two treatises on government.
Yeah, like.
Yeah, I mean, kind of a paragraph or two here or there. Here's a
Yeah.
seminal idea. This is kind of what he was talking about.
And we discuss the ideas themselves, but not the works necessarily. It depends on the class. I had some really good teachers in high school.
So then I read, Locke. I go back, I read about Locke, and I'm like, oh crap, I gotta read about the Scottish Revolution, or the Scottish Enlightenment, although he was English.
Do you like finish your first book, or are you just like?
Sometimes I get thrown off.
Yeah.
I get, there's like this centrifugal force in every book
that
like spins me out to some other issue.
You're getting mad at me now for bringing up like other topics that I happen to get to naturally from the topic that you started to. You just don't know my
It's hard to be disciplined, but what I really get mad about is that you start off with the natural rights and then you start talking about Vietnam, and now I'm all over the place.
No, because it went from natural rights to human rights to civil rights to like what happened right after the civil rights.
Oh yeah, you're right. That was the connection.
And then they kicked off the Vietnam War.
Well, I did do a lot of work reading on or listening on civil rights, which I thought was really helpful.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about the civil rights movement either, a little bit. Not as much as, there's been a lot of information that, I went to high school 25 years ago, right? And there's been a lot of information that has been developed on all of these subjects in the last 25 years.
Yeah.
It's the information is always getting developed by serious historians who are always finding something new in some library somewhere. That there's some papers that come up that no one had access to before.
Yeah, or just like new topics that people in the 50s, 60s, 70s didn't really care about. It's like just a whole new.
Well, they were saying, like when I was reading about this book on Vietnam, he was saying, this was an old book, this is from the 90s, I think, but he was like, even at that time, he's like, we just started getting all this access to a lot of otherwise previously secret government files or sealed files from, the people who were living at the time, but then when they died, now they got access to their papers, right? And there's like a federal law that says so many years before certain government papers are opened up and unsealed. But he was like, we still don't really have any information now. This may have changed, this is an older book. He's like, we don't really know anything about what the North Vietnamese and the Chinese were thinking during the war. Because we don't have access to those records.
But we got access to those later on, didn't we?
I don't know. I'm saying I don't know enough to say. I'm sure there has been some, it's been 20 years, so 25 years, so I'm sure there's been a development, but that was something that this book was made in the 90s or written in the 90s. They were saying, the author was saying, like, I don't know, this stuff is a mystery to me because it's all in Hanoi, and they're not going to let me go in there. And even if they did, I can't read Vietnamese. And the Chinese aren't really interested in helping either.
Yeah. But it's nice to like have an idea, Sometimes like just have a thought, and it kind of, fits in what I think reality is. Yes. And then they go back or go onto a Wikipedia or a book and find someone who has thought about this topic as well, and more than you have. And you just like.
Yeah, and if you go, I should go back to Wikipedia and see what they say about Locke now, because, some of this stuff is like, it's scholarly work that hasn't penetrated through, people give you the biographical details, it's a rough sketch. You don't really dig down into it, right? And even if you read it, you don't always understand. The big thing that hit me with Locke when I read it was his connection to slavery itself.
Yeah.
Then I started thinking, wondering, well, how many of these Enlightenment thinkers, had a connection, like Hobbes or John Stuart, like any of them, like any of the famous English or English-speaking philosophers had some sort of personal stake in the slave trade.
Yeah.
When they were coming up with their theories of freedom and rights. And then the other thing I was telling you was, this theory of property, right? Which Locke also did a lot of work on because of his connection with international slave trade and colonization of the New World. but a lot of the property rights that we take for granted about, like how do you lay claim to property, what is property, this stuff, it depended, the different theories depend on like where the person came from, right? So, the English had one theory because that suited their colonial claims. The Dutch had a whole different theory because that suited their colonial claims. And the guy who I think I have the most, who I never heard of before, right? I've heard of Hugo Grotius. I heard of him, I didn't know anything about him, he's Dutch. He had his theory of property, Locke had his theory of property, but the guy who has the best, or at least the one that I think is the kind of the best theory of property, is this guy named Pufendorf, who I never heard of before. I'm like, is that a real dude's name? So anyway, he's like Swedish, and so he doesn't have any real dog in the fight. They didn't have an empire to,
Wait, what's his theory on property?
It's complicated, I don't really know enough about it, but it wasn't like the English would say, the Dutch would be like, look, first of all, because they were primarily, I shouldn't say primarily, because this is also true, but they were very much interested in the freedom of the seas, right? And so Hugo Grotius is famous for like his coming up basically with modern international law, and laying the conceptual foundations for, how do we, how do we define what can be owned and what cannot be owned? Like what can be property? What can be claimed as property? And his idea was, if you can't enclose it or contain it or control it or kill it, right? It's not property. So we should all be able to like go wherever we want within those. So the sea. I mean, he's talking about the sea.
Intellectual property?
I don't think that he really got. They weren't really, as far as I understand, that was not. I mean, maybe he was. He was a very prolific and famous lawyer. I just haven't gotten to it. But that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas the English were like, you can't just. The French were like, if you plant your flag, I may be misrepresenting this a little bit, but somebody was like, if you plant your flag somewhere, you're the first one there. Yeah. It's yours.
Yeah. If you got a flag, it's your country.
And so then the English, they didn't colonize that way. And so their take was, no, you gotta cultivate the land. You have to like build a fence, and you have to like have some indicia of actual usage. Yeah. You can't just like walk by, plant your flag wherever you like, and then that belongs to you, right? So because they had different kind of colonial practices or interests, they argued for different ways of defining what property was, and Spanish had their way too. So it's all just very interesting to me that these concepts are not divorced from the political considerations of the day and the very nationalistic considerations of the day. These guys were not just like philosophers in an ivory tower, in some academic setting, who were like, oh, well, I think property should be, let's just talk about it. No, they were lawyers, they were representatives of like aristocracy, and they were very much involved in kind of arguing and advocating for, what belongs to you and what belongs to me. And if this stuff didn't work out, they'd have a war, So it's kind of in a lot of people's interest to kind of, come to some sort of agreement. Maybe not always, but it's stuff they don't teach you in high school or college or even law school. It's not in the bar exam.
I always avoided political and economic courses in high school and college.
Oh yeah, why's that?
Just wasn't into it.
What courses were you into?
Science.
What?
Like
sciencey courses?
STEM.
Yeah.
Minus engineering.
Yeah. I was into literature and philosophy. I wasn't really super interested in like law, but eventually I was interested in law.
I did more of the East Asian philosophy track. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about Zen.
Zen.
What do you know about it?
What do I know about it?
Yeah.
It's Japanese.
Is it?
It is Japanese. Zen is. I heard it came from Chan, and it comes from, obviously it comes from China, or through China.
Oh, China, it comes from China.
I'm pretty sure that the Japanese did not invent Buddhism, right? That came from India, am I correct?
I think so.
You're the East Asian Studies person. So
East Asian.
I assume the name includes the word Buddha in it, it probably did not come from Japan. It's probably their take. And I think it has some mixture Taoist philosophy in it, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so.
I remember reading that, you know, Lao Tzu, how do you say his name? Lao Tzu? Lao Tzu? Lao Tzu? Had some connection with some form of Buddhism. I remember when I was in high school, I was very interested in Taoism.
Why?
I don't know, it's just this idea of, and I'm probably just caricaturing the philosophy. This is my high school conception of Taoism, right? Like, it's not very probably well thought out or mature understanding of a centuries old or millennia old philosophy. But I like the idea of this kind of like stillness or calmness and cultivating that in yourself. I think it's always been true. It just appealed to me because that's kind of my personality. Even though that sometimes as a kid, maybe it was because I was so impulsive and uncontrollable. I couldn't control my own emotions as a kid, that it appealed to me of like, hey, this is something that should be cultivated, this, you know, stillness, calmness. I always remember the metaphor that he had, or the example of the lake, the perfectly still lake. And then that would allow you to see through to the very bottom of the lake. And the idea was not to let anything kind of disturb your lake, right? I mean, it was basically to stay calm and stay still. And sometimes doing nothing is the best thing that you can do. So, I mean, that is a great argument for passivity. Maybe not most practical of things, but you know, I kind of like that wisdom, you know. And I remember what was it? There was the Tao Te Ching. It was one of the books. I don't remember anything about it anymore, but that I would have read, I'm sure. And I thought it was cool, you know. It wasn't. There's not much in that I understood, like, because the corollary or the kind of the Western versions of these things are all wrapped up in Christianity.
Yeah.
And so that was something I definitely was not interested in at all as a teenager,
Yeah.
or as a college student.
Almost like a
Religion was definitely, like Western religion, I would thought was a giant mess that I didn't want to have anything to do with.
But Eastern is okay.
Well, because it's foreign, right? So you can, in a way, it gives you the freedom to actually like think about these things. You're not burdened by the actual, like, by not like, so look, I mean, I'm sure there are Taoist temples somewhere in China, maybe, I don't know. But I never went to one, so I was not burdened by the fact that the Taoist priest was a terrible person, right? It was totally a hypocrite,
Yeah.
right? And the Taoist temple was totally corrupt, or, you know, had done all these evil things. Like, I don't know. For me, it's just, I'm totally alien to that whole actual history of that, you know, cultural institution. So I'm free to fill it with whatever idealistic ideas that I have in my own head, right? Whereas if you're dealing with the church, you got to deal with all their history, right? I mean, like all their ideals are like laid out there, and
You don't have to.
well, I mean, I think it's hard not to, right? I think it's hard not to be. If you're a skeptical person,
Why do you have like that bulldog? I need to get to the source of the truth with everything else besides, you know, this thing.
I mean, it's not that I don't have that.
You
It's just
had-
that I didn't have it already. Like, it's not like it's
you had no reason to.
it's not a futile, well, it's no, you know, again, there was no internet when I was in high school. It wasn't like I could be like, oh, how corrupt was the Taoist, you know, temple. I mean,
You're not hearing news stories about Buddhists.
you know, the only news stories you hear about Buddhists would be,
set themselves on fire.
it would be setting themselves on fire in protest, right? Sounds good to me, you know, like, you gotta respect that.
Yeah.
You gotta respect that level of commitment.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you heard about the Dalai Lama, you know, you heard about Tibet a little bit.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's, again, it's something that is not culturally familiar, and you're not weighted down by all that baggage. You know, like, I actually had to go to church as a kid, and I always thought that was just awful punishment in and of itself. I did not see the value. It's kind of like jiu-jitsu. Let's bring around the jiu-jitsu a little bit, right? Because,
Church is like
yes,
jiu-jitsu?
because I want to see like a practical benefit to what I'm doing, right? If we watch jiu-jitsu all the time,
Uh-huh.
and our first example of jiu-jitsu was guys just getting destroyed in fights, right? If the first UFC had just had Hoist Gracie get destroyed,
Yeah.
right? We would be doing whatever the person did that destroyed Hoist Gracie, right?
Probably.
We wouldn't be doing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right?
Maybe.
So it's kind of like that when you look around and you say,
Depends on the thing though, because like,
no, I
what
know,
if they're
it's not a
medical
perfect
trainers,
analogy,
like,
but what I'm saying is, I kind of, like, if you're going to invest all that time in, like, being religious, there's got to be a payoff.
why?
Because why would you invest in it otherwise?
Wait, so you did jujitsu because it pays you, it would pay you off in some
At least,
valuable manner, right?
at least you saw that it had some practical effectiveness for, and it was more or less true and accurate to what it claimed to be.
But is that really why you do jujitsu, or is
Not
that just,
anymore, but
is that just why you tell people you do jujitsu so you don't look weird?
I'm always going to look weird. I don't think
Yeah,
there's any
you
problem.
look less weird when at least you could tell people, hey, I'll probably win in a fight if I get into one. You know? As
No,
opposed to,
I don't think that was a pretext for doing jiu-jitsu.
no, because well, you told me that like part of the reason you started was, and correct me if I'm wrong, was like because you were afraid of like basketball players fighting you. And,
Yes.
But then you
Or
started.
getting into fights.
Yeah, but then when you started doing jujitsu,
I
What
did
did you
less
do?
and less basketball.
yeah, and you got into less and less fights, right?
Yeah, because I was just in here training all the time.
Yeah, so like.
Actually, I got into more and more fights if you think
No,
about it.
not really. But so you weren't at some point you weren't training for the jujitsu like fighting aspect of it, right?
No, I think I always was. And I'll say, you say it's not really like fights, but I was in a lot of fights in high school.
Uh-huh.
I lost most of them, but I was in a lot of them.
Uh-huh.
And I have to say that I've been in many more difficult, physical, like demanding, like punishing jiu-jitsu roles
Yeah.
than like actual fights.
Yeah, there's still not fights though.
I mean, I'm not getting, the person isn't always trying to punch me in the face or kick me.
Are you talking about fights or?
No, I'm talking about jiu-jitsu.
Oh yeah.
But, I've gotten my ass pretty handed to me in jiu-jitsu.
If you're not slightly worried that someone's going to kick you in the back of the head, it's
I'm
not-
always slightly worried of that.
No, like soccer kick you in the back of the head.
Well, no one ever really soccer kicked me in the back.
They do in fights. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
you're right, in some fights, but what
no,
I'm saying
there
is
should be an element of like uncertain danger in a
Always.
real fight
always,
that is not present in jiu-jitsu,
always.
right?
No, it's
That's not-
president. I don't know who you're doing jiu-jitsu with.
No,
but
it's
not
like
the right people.
there's some danger, sure, but it's not like a fight where like you might get stabbed in the neck with a pencil.
I mean, I'm a suburban. I grew up in suburban
No, like,
America.
if
Nobody
you're-
was gonna stab me with a
If
pencil.
you're not really sure if a person might pull a knife and stab you, you're probably not in a real
That
fight.
can happen in jiu-jitsu. Sure. People have pulled guns in jiu-jitsu.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Way.
Alright, sight.
Sight.
Yeah.
I don't want to make any incriminating.
I mean, they pull a gun
People
in
making
jiu-jitsu.
making people threat. People
In-
making threats.
In matches, they like get risky.
Water bottles. Throwing water. That's a very. You never know when you're gonna get hit by a water bottle.
Ugh.
And if it's thrown by Hicks and Gracie, you are in big trouble.
Nobody's ever pulled a gun in a jiu-jitsu match.
That's not true. Not in a match, but afterwards.
Oh, that's different.
Well,
That's a fight.
I mean, that happens in basketball all the time. You hear about that, not all the time, but it's not unheard of to have somebody come back and be like, hey, you wait here, I'm gonna go,
Yeah.
and come back. And they come back and they have a weapon.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not the same thing as getting soccer kicked in the middle of things, but be that as it may, I don't think I ever, my primary focus in jiu-jitsu from the beginning has always been like the practical benefit of jiu-jitsu, right? The most practical benefit.
Weird.
It's a different era, right? There wasn't,
I mean,
there were people who were interested in sport jiu-jitsu for sure, but that was not something that I kind of ever got interested into until much later in jiu-jitsu for me. I just didn't, I was like, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
But I was wrong. There's no right or wrong answer to me. I mean, maybe there's a wrong answer, but there's many right answers. In any event, no, I don't think it was, I wasn't like pretextual about it. Like that was a sincere thing.
Yeah.
So going back to the point of like, why do you, like why don't I'm like a big believer or practitioner or thought like, oh, I could do, like use Catholic or Christian kind of teachings. It's because I was like, this stuff obviously doesn't work. Look, we're all a terrible mess from following this stuff.
Yeah.
It does not done very well for the Western civilization,
It's like
at least in modern history.
Go to a wipeout class and watching the world be like, oh, jiu-jitsu's terrible.
Yeah, but no, it would be like going to a competition jiu-jitsu class like
Yeah,
with a bunch of black belts and watching them like not be able to do anything. Yeah. That's
There are more white belts in Christianity and other religions than there are black belts.
You know, here's the thing, if you actually, like, just over the last 50 years, like, all the scandals, in like sexual abuse scandals, financial scandals, in the Catholic Church specifically, but it goes beyond that. You know, you could go to any religion. I'm not picking on Christianity, I'm not picking on Catholics. You go to any established group of
people,
of religious, but maybe even people.
Just regular people, probably.
Eventually, but the problem is like sometimes, you say there's like a bad apple, or it's like a couple bad apples at a particular time, right? Who maybe acted in concert and they got away with some stuff, and they get caught, and you're like, yeah, but that was just that group of people, right? This one's like repeated across the globe, across time, just
people every time.
People in charge, running things, who are on the one hand saying,
that doesn't sound like a religion problem. That sounds like a people problem.
It is a people problem, but it's a people problem. It's a problem, and again, it's not just religion, I understand that, but it's people using religion as a way to exploit other people.
Yeah.
And people do that with government, they do it with
Jiu-Jitsu?
Anything, right? Like people use the power inherent in their position to abuse other people. You're right, that's a human issue. But religion really makes it easy.
Yeah.
It really invites the abuse. And so you can say like, Jiu-Jitsu, we can have lots of examples of instructors or whatever taking advantage of their position. But you would never say like in every school there has been this pervasive
You would say
abuse
by
the people in charge.
What are the Catholic buildings called?
What are the building churches?
Are they churches? Yeah. Cathedrals?
Cathedrals?
Is every cathedral filled with the pedophiles? Is that what you're asserting?
No. I'm saying that people in charge, right? So if you look at every archdiocese, they've all settled like massive sexual abuse, from hundreds of priests over 50 years.
Yeah.
Right? Time after time again, where it wasn't just the priests.
Yeah, but it's not.
Right? It's not just the priests. It's the people who are in charge of keeping track and making sure the priests that they're covering this up for like generations. That is not something that happens in many other institutions.
Really?
Not in my experience. Pervasive, continual, for generations. Just a massive cover-up, that pulls in political protections, right? Like that, so they would lobby politicians and lawyers to help them, like make it so that the statute of limitations laws wouldn't change, so they could get away with it.
Yeah.
They abused not just the religious, but they abused also their power within the wider community.
This doesn't seem like a story that is secluded just to the religious.
I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that, but this is one reason why I was not attracted to anything to do with Western or Christian religion as a kid, as an adolescent.
I guess my counter argument is like, if that was your attitude, then you would have to discount a lot of institutions.
No, I think because here's the difference. I can go, right, and this is something that I did. I can go and work for a government, and I can help purge corruption in that government from within, right? I can go and I can work at the Attorney General's office. And we can become aware of corruption over at the comptroller's office, and we can prosecute those guys, and we can go send them to jail, right? Cool. I can't do that in the church. You can't go into the church, right? The church has to be prosecuted from without because it's irresponsible, right? It only cares about itself. It only cares about the people in charge of the church. Only care about the church, right? There's no whistleblowers in the church, right? Or very few, and even then they're ostracized. It has to come from outside.
Haven't we had ostracized whistleblowers?
Oh yeah, it happens in government too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying government's perfect and religion is bad. What I'm saying is we're talking about
a lot.
I'm just talking about what my thought process was as a 19-year-old kid at the time. I'm not making a wider argument about anything else.
Well, I was just wondering how, if there were other.
I'm not I don't look at the church and say, well, everyone's doing it, therefore I just might as well join up.
I was
that's not the thought process.
I just thought maybe you were to heck with religion, to heck with society, full anarchy.
No, I wouldn't go there either.
That's
not my thought. It's not like these guys are bad, therefore, and a lot of this happens everywhere else. So therefore, let's just throw up our hands and do Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
You know, that's not good.
That's an option for a high school.
That's kind of like, it reminds me that people are like, the media is biased, and then they go and their solution is to like watch some dude on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that guy is totally unbiased
That's me.
and objective. Like, yes, this makes total sense. Let me listen to this anonymous poster on a message board. You know, let me turn this into my religion.
I'm a firm believer that good ideas can come from anywhere.
That is true, but they usually don't.
And well, like good ideas also.
QAnon is not an example.
Like, if you get a good idea, do some reading, do vigorous reading, do your best. I don't know, but like you can't. I don't know. I wouldn't be so dismissive about an idea just because it came from a weird source. I wouldn't immediately adopt it and internalize it and start like professing it as truth. But you know, like good ideas can come from anywhere. Like a white belt can have a good idea about jiu-jitsu. Like it is
Maybe.
unlikely.
Maybe.
It is unlikely, but
Maybe.
it's possible. And
If I only have so
refuse
much
to not
time, and I can either go and watch Hodger Gracie tell me about jiu-jitsu, or I could listen to a bunch of white belts talk about their ideas about
believe.
jiu-jitsu.
You could
I'm
either-
probably gonna go watch
You
Hodger.
could either read about Locke, or you could, you know, read about other stuff. You get only so much time. And yeah, but
Yeah, listening to the white belts probably not a good
I'm not
use of your
saying
time.
to listen to white belts.
So you
I'm
just
just
said.
saying don't discount them immediately just because of.
Yeah, I never do because I don't listen to them in the first place, so I don't have to discount
You're
them.
missing out. It's fun.
Now, if they're a white belt that like wrestled, then maybe I'll listen to them
No, like, why would you listen to a white belt who wrestled? Like,
because he's done something or she's done something.
yeah, but like the odds of them telling you something that you haven't heard before is low because they're already like, you know, waist deep in the game. If you get someone who's never seen the water before and you ask them questions about their perspective, they might actually put together something that you would have never thought of.
Maybe not, but it's probably a good reason why I never thought of it because it's probably dumb.
It's probably dumb, but like every once in a while, it's a good idea. It's worth thinking about.
Well, kind of like sun shines on the dog's ass every once in a while
Every
too.
once in a while.
But I'm not going to be staring at a dog's ass all the time to see the light.
Well, I also don't want like white belts to be discouraged from having ideas.
Oh, I
Sometimes
do.
they're not.
The world we've got to play. It's not just white belts in jiu-jitsu, but white belts everywhere. Educate yourself
The
and then come up with an
jiu-jitsu
idea.
process is just like having all the bad ideas before eventually getting to the good ones. You just, you know, like every
Why
time
waste
you
your
roll,
time doing that when you can just go straight for the good ideas?
because you don't know what they are. You gotta find them.
They're not hard to find.
Yeah, they are.
And they're not over at the white belt corner of the world.
Sometimes.
They're over in the black belt corner.
The white belt's usually watching the most videos and doing the most research. So they might actually have knowledge siphoned, maybe not internalized, maybe not earned by blood, but you know, white belts can be little siphons of good jiu-jitsu knowledge.
I've only met a few. I mean, the reason why I point out wrestling is because there's only been a few lower belts who I've actually been like, that's a good idea. And they're usually former like judo play, like high level judo players / wrestlers because they've actually grappled.
Sure.
So that is a good source.
But,
you know?
but you're still acknowledging the white belt.
Like me as a white
have
belt having
before.
any ideas? False. No. Wrong.
Then how did you get good enough to get to a blue belt?
I trained and listened to the higher belts.
Yeah, so eventually you had good ideas, right?
No, but from them.
Yeah.
Not from
Okay,
me.
that's fine. They're still at some point like.
I'm
they're
just saying,
ahead.
if you're, I agree that there is a, look, enough time, right? You get enough monkeys, you give them enough typewriters, they'll pump out some Shakespeare for you.
Yeah.
But if you don't have all eternity to wait for a random chance
I'm not
to
telling you
generate
I'm
Hamlet,
not telling you to study
then
white belts for a
maybe
living.
you should just go to the library and pick up a copy of Shakespeare.
Yeah, maybe like you don't want to. You know, maybe you're just spending time with friends and you're talking, and one of them has a good idea.
It could happen. It could happen. You're right.
Could happen.
It could happen. Not the most efficient way to go about it, but
Yeah, but efficiency is for the birds. Like, what are we getting?
see, this is the perspective I have as an older person who is nearer to death than you. I only have so many more days in my life, so I have to be
what is
efficient in how I use them.
efficient to what? Like, will being more efficient make you better at jiu-jitsu when you're
Yes. No, but like, it'll make me better while I'm still alive.
dead? Yeah.
For the limited time I still have
But
on this earth.
so will inefficiently train.
No.
Both cases will make.
But I won't be as good.
Yeah, but you won't really.
Well, I mean,
be able
that's
to-
just a nihilistic argument. You just say like, well, what's the point? You're going to die anyway, so why do anything the right way or the wrong? There is no right or wrong way because you're going to be dead anyway.
Yeah, there is.
Well, then why even train jiu-jitsu?
Okay, here we are. All right, why train jiu-jitsu?
Well, I don't agree with the premise of that argument, which
Like,
is why I'm
is
putting that out.
the only purpose of training jiu-jitsu, it's only worth training jiu-jitsu if you can train it as efficiently as possible?
No, but if you want to get better faster, then you should want to be efficient.
Yeah, but
'Cause you don't wanna waste your time.
getting better faster shouldn't be your only goal.
I didn't say it was.
Okay, so it should always be.
Don't put words in my mouth and
Yeah, but I'm saying like if your like point is that it is always good to be efficient, I would disagree.
Okay, why would it be bad to try to be as efficient as possible? What is the negative side of that?
Joy, right? If your goal is to be and learn as efficiently as possible, then like you're not enjoying the process of jiu-jitsu.
You may not. That may be a very personal thing, right? You may personally say like, hey, I just like to come in and roll around and absorb and kind of be as, okay, I'm not saying that that's wrong at all.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's very efficient. And other people who don't have all the time in the world to just roll around and absorb through osmosis, they might have just an hour to come in and train.
Yeah, and
so they want to learn as much jiu-jitsu as they can.
I'm saying 45 minutes of that should be spent efficiently. 15 minutes of that should be spent looking around. Right? Seeing what else there is.
But that could be efficient. Observing can be efficient. You could efficiently observe.
Yeah.
That's not just like laying around and just being like,
yeah.
I'm waiting for the gods of jiu-jitsu to beam their information into my brain.
Yeah, but if you're obsessed with efficiency, then you're going to waste time when you could just be training.
Well, part of getting better is training.
Yeah, but like if you're focused on just training the best way possible, you're spending time and energy that could be spent training. Right? So like instead
those aren't
if you have a white belt who you have an open mat and only a white belt shows up, right? Like your option is to train and talk and learn things with and from that white belt, or to not train.
Those are it's not one or the other. You can be efficient. You could come in, don't take any class, right? You don't talk to anybody, and you can come in and just train. But you can do it in a very efficient manner.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And you can learn from that, depending on how you approach it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who come in, right? They're famous for not doing the class. They come in, and all they do is they just spar.
Yeah.
Right? Some of those people are very efficient on how they do that, and they can learn, and they do.
Sure.
Right? Other people are not efficient, and they don't learn.
Yeah.
Right? But there's an efficient and an inefficient way to do everything.
No.
You should, yes.
No.
Yes.
No, it's not a binary.
Depending on your goal. If your goal is to get better, there is an efficient way. There's a
there's
path
not
towards
an
that.
efficient way.
Well, there are many efficient ways.
No, there's a spectrum of efficiency, maybe even like a grid. But you couldn't be like, that's not efficient. It's like, could it be more efficient? In what sense, right? You can't just be like, it's like better to be efficient. Like, because you have no like
There are ways to determine the relative efficiency of any training method.
Efficiency in terms of what?
Of getting better.
What is getting better?
Improving.
What does improving mean in jiu-jitsu?
I mean, you can define it in different ways.
Yeah,
you can say going out and win a competition.
Okay.
I start winning, whether it's I get better, or I can lose less, right? I'm improving my skills, right? You can measure that.
Can you?
Of course.
In what way?
Your wins and losses in tournaments.
Okay.
Or even the differential between how you win, like what your point differentials are.
Yeah.
Right? I go to the tournament, and maybe in the first couple tournaments, I get tapped out.
Okay.
Right? Now I keep training, and then I go to tournaments, and now maybe I'm not winning, but I'm not getting tapped out.
Okay.
You would say that person is improving.
Okay.
Because they're not getting submitted.
And then how does efficiency go into this? How does efficiency tie into it?
Well, let's imagine that I just have a totally unstructured method. I just say to people, listen, you guys, I'm not gonna show you.
Can I remind you that my original argument was not don't be at all efficient, but rather only focusing on efficiency was not the best strategy?
But I never said that either. I never said that only efficiency was the best way.
Oh.
You're putting that on me.
Oh, interesting.
I said I wanted to be efficient in how I want to do jiu-jitsu. And specifically I said, if I want to be efficient, listening to the white belts is not the best way to be efficient. That was the extent of my point.
Okay.
Going to the black belts or watching that kind of, and I wasn't even saying that it's impossible to learn from a white belt. Because I don't believe that either. I was qualifying. I even said there are some white belts who have a lot of history.
Yeah.
And then there are also some white belts who are, maybe they're not grapplers in their history, but maybe they have something else in their background, and you can learn from that. You know, like guys who maybe they do. I mean, this actually is a guy who's a black belt, but like he's a big believer. Miles, so you probably met Miles.
Yeah,
he's a gorilla guy, and he's like into the Wim Hof breathing and whatever. Now, even if he was not awesome at jiu-jitsu, which he is, if he had come in and he's like, listen, this is a method that I use for breathing or whatever, that's something you could learn from a white belt that could be applicable not just to jiu-jitsu, but to your whole life.
I actually had a guy come in, Michael, who's a student of Miles Lucas, and he showed me some breathing exercises that I've been using.
And it's good,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, I'm not dumping on white belts just in general, right? I'm just saying like, it's not, and I'm not saying you should never listen to a white belt.
Sure.
On any subject.
But when do you decide that it's okay to, in your mind, to listen to what a white belt is saying?
Well, I mean, it's somebody who says, like, listen, I know something that you don't know about.
That makes you listen harder?
Yes, of course.
Really? I would have expected that to make you like not listen immediately.
No, if someone says, like, if Miles says, like,
no, like if a white belt came up to you and was like, I know something about jiu-jitsu that
no, not about jiu-jitsu, about something else.
Oh, no.
That might help in
I'm
jiu-jitsu.
talking about jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not probably.
Yeah, right? It's
I'm
like you're immediately dismissive.
Yeah, well, I mean, but the thing is, like, you're right. There are times where white belts come up with some stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't like. I'm not saying like, oh, somebody says, hey, I came up with something, and you're just like, I know, do not show me. This is inefficient. I want to go over here, watch my video, or call Hodger and see what he thinks.
And laugh.
Right? No, I mean, you might look at it for a second. I'm not like outright dismissive, but let me tell you, I'm skeptical.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
You
I'm like, no.
be
Because how many times have you heard somebody say, I came up with something and it's like total trash?
Yeah.
Like I've done that, right?
Yeah,
like, oh, I have this thing that I think it worked,
That's
and then
what
just
I love to do.
yeah.
It's like part of the process, right? You like have a bad idea, and then you ask your friends if it's a bad idea.
Well, I mean,
Sometimes
I think
it's
I won't
better.
disagree that I've been guilty of that, but I've quickly been disabused of like how efficient that is, right? Like for me, right? Like if I just came up and I said, like, look, we all know this. We all have these people in our schools or in our experience who like are continual font of terrible ideas, right? And they just don't ever seem to get it that, you know, maybe you should just like learn a little bit about jiu-jitsu from some more reputable, and then like your creativity can, right? Like, like come on, like, not to say that it's impossible. Like white belts have come up with some cool stuff, but unlikely.
Unlikely.
Unlikely. And if you come up with one good one, that's probably all you're ever gonna come up with.
No. I think like if someone's willing to take the time to come up with a good idea, they can come up with
But
one.
I do like the idea of people who, and look, there are famous examples of these guys and women who, you know, they get crushed, they come up with an idea, like King Cornelius, right? I mean, his story is a great story, I don't know how true it is. Or even Eddie Bravo, right? Like they get crushed doing traditional stuff, they can't compete on an even playing field with their training partners, right? Or their instructors or whatever, and they come up with a fix. And then they develop that fix. And you know, so again, but Keenan wasn't a white belt when this happened, right? I mean, he was a high-level purple belt when he started coming up with this stuff.
But the original idea is ineffective, right? Like the original concept, like it solves the problem, but like, you know, you can't just.
There's always a seed with these things, is my understanding, right? Like they get one thing that seems to work.
Yes.
And then it all falls apart for whatever reason, right? Like the person that usually murders you is stuck when you do that one thing. And then you're like, oh, this actually might be something. Yeah. And then they murder you, and you're like, okay, so when I did this, they did this other thing. So maybe if I do that, and then let's go see. And then what happens is it's like step one works, and then whatever version of step two you come up with works. Yeah. And then usually the person crushes you again. And then you go to step three, you develop these things, and then you have one guard.
Or you could modify the original thing so that their reaction can't happen.
Right.
It's like,
I mean, you know, like, I'm not saying that, I mean, look, somebody came up with, I mean, Ricardo De La Riva came up with De La Riva. That was not something that was.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if Keenan came up to you and was like, hey, I've got this idea, the seed that I have, that it only works for this one problem, you know, you would look at it and be like, great, like, go back, go.
There's a lot of things in jiu-jitsu that you can stiff, right, or stop with that first move.
Yes.
Right? And so, but there's not a lot of things where you get that first move and then you have a second move. Right? There's some things where you can stuff it, I think was the word I was looking for, and then something terrible happens, right? They just go right to your back, right? Or they just choke you, or whatever it is. So there's that where you're like, oh look, I can just stop them if I just stiff arm them or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you're like, yeah, well, no, that's not a good idea for whatever reason. So the majority of those ideas are terrible ideas, right? But there is every once in a while, and this is why these people are famous. They develop something that's special and actually works.
So the thing is,
but they're famous because they're special, because it's rare.
No, my foundational idea, I think, and this is kind of like branches from my idea about math, right? But like, jiu-jitsu techniques aren't created; they're discovered. You know, you find what works. You don't design what works. You know, you don't. Most people don't sit in a shop and tinker and create blueprints and formulate mechanical advantage theories. They train and they find a thing that works for them, and it does. It's this like simple process.
Well, it's kind of like science, right? Like you kind of have theories about, you have a problem, right? And then you try to formulate a solution. And then you try to see if that solution is repeatable, right? Because sometimes things work for mysterious reasons. And so if you're like John Danaher, right? You have a series of problems and this is how he thinks, right? There's a heuristic is the fancy word for it, where he has a problem that he identifies, something that prevents them from achieving their goal. Mm-hmm. And then he says, okay, here's the problem. What is the nature of the problem, right? And how do I surmount that problem? Yeah. And then he goes through it, and I know this firsthand. He experiments with it, right? And just because John can get it to work is not necessarily mean that it's indicative of being a solid technique. It's not until he can introduce it to other people, athletes from all different shapes and sizes, that he then will say, it's tested and, see if, more or less more people can do it, that it becomes more of a foundational kind of technique, right? Something that is actually workable across a broad spectrum of, abilities and builds and weight classes or whatever. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Now, that's a little different than what an individual can do, right? An individual has their own particular.
Well, why is it different?
It's different because it's like medicine, right? I can have a vaccine, right? And it will work in 98% of the population. Mm-hmm. But 2% of people will die from it, will have an allergic reaction and maybe die from it. Sure. Right? Or I can have a vaccine that's not very effective. It might only be effective 50% of the time, but it's totally safe, right? But it will depend sometimes on the individuals, right? Like different people have different reactions, different abilities. Yeah, the things that you can do individually don't necessarily scale across all your students. So that's one of the dilemmas of being an instructor.
You think it's really like based on the individual, or because I would picture like I always think a move's not working because of the situation. I mean, I'm sure it's like both.
I mean, it's a dynamic, but like there are techniques that work, that people make work because of their own, like Michael Lange, for example, right? Apparently his unbreakable grips, right? He's super strong, he's skinny, right? And he's like incredibly flexible, mm-hmm. right? He has all these like kind of special attributes that make him, his ability to play, certain types of guard, like spider guard is what he's famous for, that are special to him, that he can do because of his own personal attributes, right? That may not scale.
What does that mean? Everyone can do spider guard. If you got
hands but your ability to actually use spider guard at a high level may be dependent upon how strong your grips are.
Sure.
How long your arms are, how long your legs are, how flexible you are, right? And so if you don't share, it's like Eddie Bravo, right? Like if Eddie Bravo, I love this, right? So Eddie Bravo was always very upfront and honest about rubber guard, right? He's like, most people can't do this. Yeah. Most people can't, they're not as flexible. So what was the solution? Stretch, right? But I don't care how much you stretch. There's gonna be a wide group of people in jiu-jitsu who are not gonna be flexible enough to do it. Eddie Bravo is special in terms of his ability to be strong within a very flexed positions. I don't know what the right word is, but you know what I mean? Like he's in rubber guard, he's still totally, I can get into rubber guard, but I can't do anything else, right? And I'm not very strong in there. Yeah. He's so flexed, like BJ Penn is another example of a guy who could just throw his leg over his head.
But it's not like they like, I'm going to consider my attributes. I know exactly how much
this is the thing, right?
Put together my technique.
No, he came up, I think he is actually a very systemic thinker, or systematic thinker, right? Where he actually tries to create some sort of structure. He didn't just,
No,
if you look at it, he was one of the first guys that ever came up with like a real system around what he was doing.
And I agree with you completely that he came up with a system, and I don't want to discount like the work. I just want to highlight the order in which things happen. Right?
Yeah, we don't know that. I don't know the
No,
story
like-
of Eddie
like
Bravo, so I can't say to that level of granularity.
Personally, like I believe in terms of technique, the existentialist idea that was it existence precedes essence of things.
Okay, well,
Right, the idea, like when you're trying to conceptualize techniques, when you're like applying, you're using language to describe what's happening,
yes.
right? What I think happens is techniques will occur naturally as people roll, right? When certain environments, certain conditions are met, techniques will naturally be manifest based on what the goals are of each person, what everyone's doing, right? Like techniques happen, right? Like this goes back to the idea.
Like magically without intention?
Yeah, well, no, like as long as the rules are set and people are both like going for submissions or like, they're both like following the point system. Like jiu-jitsu will kind of more or less be the same as long as people are trying to follow the same goals and following the same rules, right? If I took two people, put them on a different country and they'd never heard of jiu-jitsu, and we gave them the rules of jiu-jitsu and told them that like that was going to be their life goal, like I believe that jiu-jitsu could be fully recreated, right?
Well, the rules are actually an indication of what jiu-jitsu is. So if you
Yeah,
tell them the
that's
rules are
what I'm
actually
saying. Like,
creating jiu-jitsu,
you
they're
have-
not making it up. You're giving them the parameters.
No, you give them the parameters, and from there, the techniques within jiu-jitsu.
Because
emerge.
because
you have to give them a
that's
set.
very circular. It's very circular.
I know, like that's.
Well, then
it
I
is.
don't know that that's really provable. But how is it helpful? Just go to your point. Go to
We're
your point
talking
of what
about,
you're.
so the point is like, we're talking about where techniques come from, right? Like, individuals don't.
No,
think
I
of
wasn't talking
techniques.
about where techniques come from. What I was saying was.
Hold on, can I talk?
Okay, good.
All right, like when we're talking about where techniques come from, like I believe that techniques happen and you find them, you notice them, right? And then there are people out there who have found techniques that work for them based on their body type, right? Based on who they train with and their needs as individuals, right? And then they develop these natural patterns that they have manifested with their own like bodies and stuff, and then they describe them to people, right? Rather than look at the problem and you think really hard about it, and then you come up with a solution.
Not if you're John Danaher.
Well, John Danaher also has like the background of having gone through the process of internalizing jiu-jitsu and like understanding it. And then he's also able to really articulately
Yes.
communicate that with other people. But I still believe that like maybe there are people who can like you said with John just kind of look at a problem and then solve.
I mean,
the
I don't
problem.
want to say that he's like sitting at his desk and
Yeah,
just like,
yeah, he's like,
it's very practical on the mat, like,
working it through.
like with, through the process of actually rolling
Yeah.
competitively with other people.
But that's the
Right.
rolling process.
Yeah, that's not
It's
divorced, or it's not like,
yeah.
again, it's not like John Locke sitting there thinking about property.
Yeah, he's
What
like-
should it be? I mean, he has a real practical
He's having
thing that
experiences.
he's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, like you have these experiences where it's like,
Yes.
yes, like this technique works,
Yes.
and then you try to tell people why.
I think there's that, some people, again, I'm not generalizing across everyone, everywhere. My only point was that, I don't even remember what the point was, but I was contrasting the idea of like a Michael Longi being able to do some special things because he has special attributes that not everyone shares. And so that jiu-jitsu is not broadly applicable beyond the population of people that share pretty much his abilities, right? I think, and I don't know what the bigger point I was trying to make anymore because
It's Friday.
I'm tired, but
Yeah.
what was the point I was trying
We
to
started with Zen.
Zen. Yeah, but then we got off on, I think it's because I was talking about Taoism and then we were going to Buddhism and then this and that. I don't know. What do you want to say about Zen?
I like it.
You like it. Why do you like it? What is Zen?
I don't know.
You don't know? What do you mean?
I don't
What
know.
is the basic tenet of Zen Buddhism? Is there one?
I don't know.
No, you don't know. What do you want to talk about? You just want to say you like Zen Buddhism?
I wonder if jiu-jitsu is Zen.
I don't know. If you can't tell us what Zen is, then, and I'm not looking it up.
Me neither.
So I mean, I have to go back to John Locke at some point.
I don't know. I always like kind of considered jiu-jitsu as a form of meditation.
Yes, I agree.
But I've also been told that if you try to meditate, that you're not meditating. So I'm inclined to believe that jiu-jitsu is not a form of meditation, but also secretly hoping that by saying that it's not, that it actually is.
Well, I don't think like I've ever been able to come and do jiu-jitsu, like and train, and not get into like that sort of like a particular mindset. Right, of just being like focused just in the moment on what is happening right there, right? So it's a singularity or clarity of purpose in that moment. Like I'm not, it's like a form of escapism, really, where whatever the stresses and strains of your everyday life, you can forget about them for however long you're actually training. And I don't know if that's a definition of meditation, but you're kind of alone with your thoughts and yourself, even though you're training with other people. You're still in the moment of training, focused entirely on whatever that is. And I'm not like thinking about what I'm gonna have for dinner or the work that I have to do.
Do you feel alone with your thoughts when you roll?
I mean, I guess. I'm not like thinking very deep thoughts when I'm rolling. I'm like just focused on, not getting arm locked or arm locking that person or, trying to stay on top or not, getting tired or I'm doing just jujitsu. It's just jujitsu that's happening. It's just with that person, right? And it's just that moment. I don't know if that's what meditation is or what people would consider it to be. Again, you have to look up what the definition. I'm sure there's different definitions of meditation, what the purposes are, how they manifest themselves. I don't know, but it's like anything else. It's like requires your undivided attention in that moment. It's not like driving a car. Driving a car, I can have all sorts of thoughts. I'm not like focused just on turning the wheel of the car. Like in jiu-jitsu, you gotta focus on turning the wheel of the car.
Yeah.
In a way, I mean, you can do a lot of things automatically, but when you're trying to submit somebody, you're not like thinking about usually, or not being submitted. You're not thinking about some other thing.
The car's not trying to drive you back at the same time.
Right. I mean,
yeah.
No, we're not going that way. We're going this way.
Yeah.
But I do agree, and I think even if it's not meditative, it's definitely therapeutic.
In what sense?
I mean, in the sense that you can like step away from, there's a couple senses, but like in the sense that you can step away from whatever it is, kind of gives you a different perspective on things. Sometimes I found that jiu-jitsu helps me get some distance or perspective on something, and then when I'm done with it, then the thing that whatever it is that maybe I was working on or thinking about or whatever, I might have a new, fresher insight into whatever that is or perspective on that thing, because I just haven't had to think about it. Like when you dwell on something all the time, mentally you lose perspective on it, right? It kind of fills your mental or emotional field of vision, right? The longer you think about a problem, the bigger kind of you zoom in and it seems to get bigger. I'm using very spatial ideas here, but when you step back and you have that kind of distance, you don't look at something for a little bit. When you go back to it, you kind of look at the whole picture, whatever it is, and you can kind of say like, oh, I was so zoomed in on this part of it, I didn't see this other part over here. Kind of for me, it gives me like this kind of fresh set of eyes or fresh perspective on something else, whatever it is that my mind's been chewing on.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
At what point did that become your reason for training as opposed to learning how to fight?
I never stopped wanting to learn how to fight. It's not either or.
No?
I mean, I think look, I'm not getting into fights in a general, as a general rule anymore. So I'm also not like grappling with, complex legal issues anymore, like, you know what I mean? Like, so like that, I'm not doing that as much, but I probably did more of that or benefited from jiu-jitsu in that respect than I did in actual like getting into fights, because I would be doing that all the time. And so having that perspective for a second, or getting the frustration, right? Like just being able to physically move around. If you're sitting at a desk all day, looking at a computer, reading things and writing things, being able to step away from that for a second, like refreshes your body, right? Like that, I think there's a physical element to meditating as well, right? To actually physically step away. There's one of the things that Jocko Willink says a lot of great stuff. If you guys don't watch Jocko Willink, or listen to his podcast, definitely go and do it. He's awesome. But one of the things he talks about is this perspective, right? He's like, if you're always looking down, like the barrel of your scope, or you're always looking down, you know, your gun is up at your, you know, you're only focused at the point of aim, right? And so if you're up at the line with all your, you know, you're the officer, you're in charge, you're supposed to be helping everybody else, and everybody's looking down the barrel of their guns, then everybody is kind of looking just, first of all, you decide you're going to shoot somebody, right? And you're not watching anything else anymore. And his thing was, and he extends this, he extrapolates it to like leadership in general, is if you just step back and put your gun down, by definition you have a broader, wider view of what is happening in the situation. And you, as the leader, right, can see things that your team cannot see, because they're all focused on whatever thing that they're trying to shoot, so to speak. Right? And there's a presumption that all you can do is shoot. You've already brought the gun up, so you're already prepared to just shoot. You're in that almost like a defensive or aggressive kind of posture. Whereas he can kind of look back and say, you know, okay, what are people doing? What do we need to do? Does somebody need to move around? Is, you know, like, is somebody flanking us? You know, what are we missing here when we only look down the barrels of our guns? And I think, you know, and he, like I said, he extrapolates that beyond into like everything, like both personal and organizational. And I think it's a really good insight. And and I think that's what jiu-jitsu kind of does. I mean, jiu-jitsu can also focus you so much that you lose perspective. So I don't think like just doing jiu-jitsu is like this, you know, miracle panacea, right? Like you gotta step back from jiu-jitsu too, right? You can't. Jiu-jitsu can be like staring down a scope or the sights of a weapon as well. You know, and you start to think like jiu-jitsu is the answer to everything. Just like if all you do is looking on a scope, you think shooting's the answer to everything. If I just shoot and kill it, you know, problem is solved.
It works
right?
for some people.
But it's like anything else. I mean, you should try to like recognize. I think the wider lesson is that like you're always kind of looking through a prism or like a specific way of looking through things at the world. But that has its inherent limitations, right? Like nothing is the be-all, end-all answer. Jiu-jitsu is not. I mean, I think it can be a way to look at life and govern your life and guide your life. I think it certainly has a set of tools that it gives you that allows you to apply across like your personal life, your professional life. But it's just one. There are other ways to look at the world. You know, jiu-jitsu isn't the only one. You could be a Zen Buddhist and have a whole different setup, but they're very much about distance and detachment, right, and stepping away, and that gives you more insight, right? Like that's kind of like meditation, right? Separating yourself, just distancing yourself from the world, detaching yourself, right? Isn't that Buddhism?
I think it's discussed. Like lessening attachment is important in some people. I don't know. I've purposefully not read anything.
Ignorance is bliss.
I don't know. I just assume that if it's important, you'll have read it, and then we can talk about it.
All right, I'm going home. Have a good weekend, guys. I got a lot of reading to do, as you can see. I'm getting assignments left and right.